Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Now, as the war in Ukraine grinds on, a phone call between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin is drawing global attention. The Kremlin now says a ceasefire is possible if both sides reach agreement on a future peace framework, with new mentions of a memorandum and renewed contacts in Istanbul. Meanwhile, European leaders are urging caution, and Ukraine remains under heavy attack. Joining us today on TVP World to assess what we know and what might come next is Mariia Zolkina, Head of Regional Security and Conflict Studies at the Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiative Foundation, a leading voice in Ukraine's wartime diplomacy and regional dynamics. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to TVP World.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So I think we are all at this point trying to dissect what's really going on behind that phone call. With what we know, how should we interpret the language that's being used by the Kremlin after the Trump-Putin call? Is it meaningful, or do you think it's just some diplomatic messaging?
I think that the slight hope for kind of rationalization of the position of the White House regarding Russia, in particular, hope for better understanding that Russia is not really seeking a constructive solution for this conflict and the way out of this conflict. The slight hope has been disappearing basically among Ukrainian experts, politicians on the one hand, and European politicians and leaders on the other hand after this call. In particular, because Trump is not following his own political promises to make the pressure on Russia stronger in case Russia is not demonstrating any willingness to talk constructively and practically about the ceasefire. And I don't think that in the nearest future, the position of Russia will change. However, this call between Trump and Putin returned us actually to the situation when Trump tried to please Moscow with political offers, compromises favoring Russia's position in this war, rather than playing a role of a mediator looking for a stable solution when no one wins, but no one loses.
All right. The Trump administration early on in the conflict, I think, was under a little bit of kind of miscalculation when it comes to Putin's willingness to come to the negotiation table. And I think rightfully, like you mentioned, this illusion has been shattered ever since the negotiation is actually engaged. Now, do you think that there's at some point the U.S. administration will change course and respond kind of reactively to the reality? Or do you think that it's going to still kind of stay the course of trying to utilize the the carrot more than the stick when it comes to negotiating with Putin?
I think that the most realistic scenario is that Trump will just put on pause his negotiation and mediators' attempts to be active in Russia-Ukraine war if he doesn't get any results soon. So I don't think that if you compare two scenarios, that in case Russia is not negotiating constructively, then one scenario Trump is putting more pressure on Russia, and the second scenario Trump is just losing interest because he doesn't receive any fast agreement, any speed up of the process. I do think that the second scenario, when he loses interest, is more realistic now, and this is more scary and risky for Europe and for Ukraine. However, Ukraine seems to be more politically ready for this kind of scenario. However, Europe is not, because all the attempts which are being done right now to keep attention of Donald Trump in the focus of Russia-Ukraine war, all these attempts, they are being delivered not just by Kyiv, but also by London, Paris, Warsaw, Berlin. However, Trump was not particularly interested in looking for a stable and sustainable solution for Russian aggression against Ukraine. He is looking for a very fast and, let's say, blitzkrieg decision about at least a ceasefire without details towards what comes next, how this ceasefire is going to be monitored, verified, how it will going to be guaranteed, and whether there will be any sanctions for the party who will most potentially broke this ceasefire if this is not based on real guarantees and verification. So I don't think that Trump will be in the process for a long time. And most probably, if his strategy in the nearest time to push Ukraine for unfavorable for Kyiv compromises is not going to work, which is pretty realistic. Ukraine will not accept the concessions to give up its honest territory, to forget about defense and security alliances, not only NATO but others one, to refuse from defense cooperation and delivery of weapons to Ukraine, which is again not acceptable for Ukraine. All this stuff is not acceptable for Kyiv. For this reason, I don't see any window basically for negotiations, even about the ceasefire, to be successful. And for that reason, I do believe there is a high risk that Trump will just turn his back on this conflict diplomatically and just move on towards other topics which bring him more diplomatic, more which bring and contributes better to his image of global leader making deals.
All right, now after this phone call, Trump is using some optimistic language, but of course it's very on brand for the US president, where he sometimes kind of overplay how much success he's been getting when it comes to these negotiations. We've seen Putin repeatedly kick the can down the road. Do you think that this time is anything different? Do you see actually any sorts of development, or is it another case where perhaps Putin feed him the words he wanted to hear and then just disregard that and drag this thing out even longer?
I don't think we have any ground for optimism, and language, political language of Trump is always about hopes and optimism, like something has already happened. But in fact, since late January, when he started his role as mediator, he claims nothing basically happened except for ups and downs in Ukraine-US relations. Starting from the scandal in the Oval Office and getting to normalization in the framework of mineral resources deal, which was signed recently. But in the talks about the ceasing of the active warfare, nothing has significantly happened, despite there were talks between US and Russia, US and Ukraine, and even the direct negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Istanbul a couple of days ago. But speaking about the Russia and US disposition here, Putin is not gonna speak to Ukraine as to an equal partner to make a deal about even a ceasefire. Trump understands that, but he needs the result. So he will still, for a short term period of time, will try, in my opinion, to please Putin with promises about getting back to relations, business relations, political relations with US. If Putin gives his agreement to a ceasefire, but Putin knows that the price of this ceasefire shouldn't be too low for Russia. For that reason, they will try to make a deal when something much bigger than just getting back to business as usual is on the table. That's why they are demanding to speak about comprehensive peace deal, but not very practical issue of a ceasefire. Because when we're speaking about a huge peace deal, these talks can last for decades and still have nothing as an outcome. But the concessions and compromises which Putin demands from Ukraine through Trump policy is something which will give effect for Ukraine and for Europe immediately, like no security guarantees, no weapon delivery, the cease of the martial law in Ukraine, and demobilization or limitations, restrictions on the Ukrainians' army functioning numbers, etc. So this is a disbalance between what Putin wants and what Trump, even having his certain leverage on Ukraine, can give in fact. For this reason, there is no window for optimism, I would say now.
Right. Now, so there's something also I find relatively perplexing, because the BBC has just reported that Trump reportedly threatens to walk away from mediating if Putin and Zelensky don't come to a conclusion or at least some sort of ceasefire. But Well, seeing that Trump now understands that Putin is being the difficult partner here, and he's the one that kind of wants to drag this thing on, this threat doesn't make a lot of sense to me, whereas it's almost as if he's rewarding bad behavior. Do you think there's any other sorts of calculation behind the scene, or does Russia actually have any skin in the game for Washington to be interested in still continuing this mediation effort? Or do you think it's perhaps just a miscalculation on the part of the U.S. administration?
Of course, there might be some factors which are latent and which we are not aware of, which back basically this kind of warm relationship between Trump and Putin. But I do think that the main problem is in the framework and the mindset, which is the basis and the foundation for Trump's foreign policy. He, like Putin, in many cases believes that the solution for the conflict, resolution of the conflict, when global leaders are making a deal, and those who are considered to be weaker players in the international arena should just follow what was agreed, what was made as a deal on the upper level, let's say. From this point of view, this mindset is very similar towards what Russia and Putin wanted since the beginning of the large-scale war against Ukraine. They didn't want to speak with Ukraine. They just wanted to redistribute the spheres of influence in Europe, to make a veto on the defense and security cooperation of not only Ukraine but on Eastern European partners. I will just remind that the war started not exactly with invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, but with the ultimatum which Putin sent towards NATO to go back to the NATO borders as of 1997, which meant really redistribution of powers like it was in the times of the Cold War. So it's not just about Ukraine, it's just about much larger issues. And from this point of view, Trump and Putin really have, understanding of each other. So I don't think that there is something different necessarily is backing this kind of approach from Trump towards Russia. He thinks that there might be some political concessions, compromises, sacrifices on the side of weaker states, like not only Ukraine, but even Europe. Let's have a look how Trump considers Europe, like somebody who was parasiting basically on the shoulders of US defense and security shield. And now he doesn't care what consequences will the disbalance between Ukraine and Russia will have for America's former partners or current partners within NATO in Europe. So but they are scared because they know they will be the next one in the turn or in the queue to be attacked hybridly
all very alarming kind of statements there. Unfortunately, we are running a little bit out of time, but thank you so much for breaking all of that down for us. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us. Cheers. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.